I am beginning with an acknowledgement of how the real world affects the science that we do and who gets to do that science. The unrest in the United States this week, sparked and fanned by police violence against people of color, has parallels here in Australia. I ask you to take a moment with me to acknowledge the over 400 Aboriginal people who've died in police custody since the Royal Commission in 1991. Going forward, I ask you to consider what you personally are doing to support your colleagues and your students in communities affected by this violence, and what actions we can all be taking to address the structural racism in academia, to make our community an environment where everyone is welcome and is able to succeed. Thank you. So, GALAH and FirstStars are galactic archaeology projects. And that puts them under the umbrella of near-field cosmology. And near-field cosmology is a great intersection between different research questions and methods. The fundamental science goals for galactic archaeology are to map the present-day galaxy, to use what we know about the physical processes at work to also map backwards into its history and its evolution. Now, to do that work, there we go. Okay, to do that work, we need models of the physics that are at play. So stellar evolution models, galactic chemical evolution models are examples of that. And we also need analysis methods that make sense for the data at hand. And that includes things like spectrum synthesis and more recently, machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we naturally have connections to many of the other parts of ASTRO 3D and to astronomy more broadly. When we're looking at the evolution of the Milky Way, that needs to be interpreted in the light of everything we know about galaxy evolution from other galaxies. We're equipped to provide quantitative tests for numerical simulations that seek to replicate the Milky Way, and we're gathering the data needed to refine our understanding of star formation history, important nucleosynthetic sites, and models for dark matter particles. So we build this work on the foundation of a really broad and multidimensional data set. Galaxy evolution talks like to show a big wheel of all their multi-wavelength data sources. And this is our version of that. Because survey spectroscopy, targeted follow-up, astrometry, parallax, proper motions, astroseismology, all of these things contribute complementary information about different aspects of the problems that we're trying to study. So where's GALAH at right now? We are moving forward. We're a large program at the AAT. We've had something like 20% of all allocated AAT time since 2013. Our data analysis process is something that we've had to build from the ground up. And Sven Buder, who'll be talking next, has been really successful with that. We're delivering abundances for up to 30 elements for each of our stars. This year, we've started a new observing strategy where we're focusing on stars that we can derive accurate ages for to really boost the time evolution parts of the project in terms of things like dynamical evolution and galactic chemical evolution. The next set of AAT allocations were just announced yesterday, and we have another 190 nights between now and the end of 2022, which is exciting. So there are two really major science drivers for GALAH. And the first is to use what we already know about galaxies and about the Milky Way in particular, and to strengthen that knowledge with a really thorough sampling of stars in the Milky Way. And the second is to learn things we don't already know by looking for correlations and clustering and structure in the multidimensional space of kinematics, abundances, and ages that we have in our data set. One of our big milestones is that we are making our third public data release later this year. We're aiming for the 1st of September. And Sven, who is talking later, will give more detail on this. But it's an expansion in terms of the number of stars, in terms of the information per star, and also in terms of making all of our reduced spectra available to the community, as well as the results from the analysis, so that other people can make other and different analyses if they want to, and see what other science we can get from the same data set. With the data that we've been collecting since 2013, we've been able to publish on a lot of the really central science questions that we're interested in. We've looked at the dynamics of stars in the disk, we've looked at time evolution of abundances, we've done chemical tagging, we've done a lot of identifying of interesting and unique stellar systems in the data set in sort of a data science way. So there's a lot going on in terms of publications that we're really excited about, that's really in process and really active right now. And I want to tell you just a couple of the science highlights that we've got before I turn over to the other speakers to tell you more in more depth about some of the projects they've been working on. So this is this figure is from a paper that was published last year, I think, by Shoria Khanna, who was a PhD student at Sydney Uni, who's now a postdoc in the Netherlands. And this is based on a result from the Gaia spacecraft, the Gaia big data set, that found that if you look in velocity versus position space, that the Milky Way disk is not smooth, that there is, the panel on the far right shows sort of a set of linear structures that they call ridges. And so the study by Shoria was showing that this can be interpreted through appropriate simulation of the disk as spiral structure plus some kind of external perturbation. And so this allows us to actually put quantitative limits on previous dynamical interactions between the Milky Way and some dwarf galaxy perturber that dropped through the disk and has disturbed these ridges from their original structure. So that's exciting to be able to be quantitative about something in the history of the Milky Way. Another result another recent result is from Jeffrey Simpson, who will also be speaking in a little bit. There was streams of stars in the Milky Way have become a really hot topic with the release of the Gaia dataset and our ability to look very carefully at the orbits of stars in a larger volume in the galaxy. And so there was a result from Kiadi Malhan, Rodrigo Abada, and their group in Strasbourg, where they found a stream that they called Fimble. They found a whole lot of streams. They named them after rivers in Norse mythology. And Fimble happens to be very interesting because it is near the GALAH dataset in the sky, and it is also kind of near the globular cluster Omega Centauri, which is a very compelling target because it is a very weird globular cluster. If it even is, it may be the nucleus of a dwarf galaxy that's been captured by the Milky Way. So we had lots of motivation to try to follow this up and figure out what was really going on there. And so Jeffrey went and looked spatially and in proper motion space and in velocity space to see if we have stars in GALAH that are consistent with this Fimble stream that was found, and we have a few. And then he was able to take it farther and go into chemical tagging. And so the 4 panels here are all metallicity versus different elemental abundances. And the reason that this is effective in this particular case is because Omega Centauri has a very unusual positive correlation between these heavy element abundances and metallicity. And so we can pick out the 3 stars on the left that overlap with the blue dots that are Omega Centauri stars in GALAH, and say those, not only are they in the right place and moving the right direction, they're also made out of the right stuff to be actually also part of the stream and to confirm that the stream really does associate with Omega Centauri. And so that will let us do more of the backwards projection into mass loss from Omega Centauri. Has it been sort of evaluating the idea that it really was a dwarf galaxy that fell in and is falling apart now? So that's very exciting, and it has a lot of good potential for future work. The FirstStars project is a separate project from GALAH, and I'm speaking about both of them. So FirstStars is also making excellent progress. They're meeting really important milestones recently. The search for extremely metal poor stars in SkyMapper has wrapped up, is complete. They have found them, which is very exciting. They've also gone and followed up 100 of those stars with really detailed spectroscopic data and done really careful analysis for those abundances in order to explore nucleosynthesis in the very early universe. They've been working to develop the modeling of stellar atmospheres in these very metal poor stars, which are complex, and they're different. They behave differently to more the stars with compositions like the sun. Because the metallicities are so low, the normal opacities and the normal radiative transfer processes operate a bit differently, and so you have to make specific models for that in order to interpret those stars correctly. And they're also working on modeling of population 3 star formation, which is very exciting, and Piyush will talk about that later as well. So a couple of science highlights from FirstStars. As I mentioned, the search for extremely metal poor stars has been successful. And so this plot shows basically how you can identify the metallicity of a star from SkyMapper photometry. And this is a thing that's been designed into SkyMapper. This is one of the original science cases for the whole project was this metallicity sensitivity. And the color coding shows the actual spectroscopic metallicity, and you can see that they separate really quite nicely in this photometric space. And so this allows the FirstStars team to find really good candidates for these might be very metal poor stars, and to then go and take follow-up data and to confirm them. And then this plot is the result of all of that work. It's the metallicity distribution function at the very bottom end of metallicity in the galaxy. And the two things that are really essential about this is in doubling the number of known extremely metal poor stars, they're able to really bring down the error bars on this and really tightly constrain what is the shape of the metallicity distribution function, which has important implications for star formation and for chemical evolution in the very early universe. It also allows us to find that there's a really interesting behavior in carbon in these stars, in that some of them have far too much carbon, the huge excess, and some of them don't. And this suggests that there's actually two different ways that you can make stars at very early times. And so that actually allows this project to comment on star formation at the epoch of reionization, where it was happening, what physical factors come into how the stars are forming, what the massive stars are going to be like, and what kind of nucleosynthesis can happen there. Another highlight I mentioned about trying to do really careful simulations of stellar atmospheres under these very metal poor conditions. So Ella Wang, who's a PhD student at ANU, has been doing these simulations. The columns here are different stars, and the rows are sort of showing different quantities that are being simulated. And each patch is literally a little patch of the stellar atmosphere. And so you can see that she's able to replicate really well the granulation that we know happens in the surfaces of stars. But what she can also follow is that as the convection happens, and as there's a combination of hotter and cooler parts of the surface that all end up in the same line of sight in the same spectrum that we observe, that creates very subtle changes in the shape of the line that affect our interpretation and our assumed abundance of whatever element we're looking at. So these kinds of models are really essential for properly interpreting the data that we can collect in order to really understand the compositions of these stars at very early times. And like I said, get into what is star formation doing, what is nucleosynthesis doing, way back at the very earliest of star formation. So to sum up, GALAH and FirstStars, although separate projects, are both galactic archaeology projects that both serve as a really effective near-field anchor for Astro 3D science. We have a lot of really exciting synergies with other Astro 3D projects. We participate robustly in the international galactic archaeology community and the international astronomy community more broadly. And we are working hard to be not just high volume, but also clever in terms of what we can do with the data that we have and the scientific impact that we can make. So thanks very much for your time.